A 7-year-old girl walked into a Christmas charity event at an abandoned Treehouse estate, and while adults whispered and laughed at the poor child playing dress-up, she was about to uncover what powerful people had spent decades trying to bury. Before we explore this incredible story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The first snow of December had arrived in Riverside Junction 3 days early, dusting the forgotten estate on Maple Hill with a thin veil of white that made everything look softer, cleaner, almost innocent. The old Victorian mansion stood at the edge of town like a relic from another era, its turrets and gables reaching toward a grey sky that promised more snow by nightfall. Behind the main house, sprawling across nearly 2 acres of overgrown garden, stood what the town had once called the Treehouse Village, an elaborate network of wooden structures connected by rope bridges and spiral staircases, built in the late 1800s by a timber baron for his 12 children. Most of it had fallen into disrepair over the decades. Branches pushed through rotted planks. Rope bridges sagged dangerously. But there was something magical about it still, especially now, wrapped in Christmas lights that someone had strung hastily that morning, their glow soft against the gathering dusk. Maya Chen stood at the iron gates of the estate, her small hand tucked inside her grandmother's weathered palm. She was 7 years old, small for her age, with dark eyes that seemed too observant, too knowing for a child. Her winter coat was 2 sizes too big, a hand-me-down from the church donation box, and her boots had duct tape holding the sole to the left one. But she wore a red velvet ribbon in her hair that her grandmother had tied that morning with trembling fingers, and she held her chin high as they walked through the gates. Rose Chen, 68 years old and bent slightly from decades of cleaning other people's homes, squeezed her granddaughter's hand. She had worked for the Riverside Historical Society for the past 3 years, scrubbing floors and polishing banisters in the mansion they'd converted into a community event space. Tonight was the annual Christmas Gala for Hope, a charity fundraiser that brought out every wealthy family within 50 miles. Rose wasn't invited as a guest. She was there to work. But she'd brought Maya because leaving her home alone wasn't an option, and because maybe, just maybe, seeing how beautiful the world could be might give the child something to dream about. They entered through the service entrance, a side door that led to the kitchen, where caterers in crisp white jackets were arranging canapes on silver trays. The woman in charge, Helen something or other, looked up with thinly veiled irritation when she saw Rose. "You're late," Helen said, not bothering with a greeting. "Traffic was bad on Route 9, Rose replied quietly. "The bridge construction." Helen's eyes flicked to Maya, who stood perfectly still, taking in the organized chaos of the kitchen with quiet fascination. "What's the child doing here? She'll stay out of the way, I promise. She can sit in the back hallway." Helen sighed dramatically, as if this small accommodation might somehow ruin the entire evening. "Fine, but if anyone asks, I didn't authorize it." Rose nodded, grateful and humiliated in equal measure. She led Maya through the kitchen to a narrow hallway lined with old photographs of the estate in its glory days. There was a small wooden stool tucked against the wall, and Rose guided Maya to sit. "Stay here, sweetheart," Rose said, kneeling so they were eye level. "I'll be working in the main hall, but I'll check on you every chance I get. Don't wander off, okay?" Maya nodded solemnly. "Okay, Grandma." Rose kissed her forehead, the gesture quick and fierce, then disappeared back into the kitchen. Maya sat on the stool, swinging her legs that didn't quite reach the floor, and listened to the sounds of the party beginning in the rooms beyond. Laughter, glasses tinkling, a string quartet playing something classical and beautiful. She pulled a small book from her coat pocket, a library copy of Charlotte's Web that she'd read 3 times already. But before she could open it, she heard voices approaching down the hallway. 2 women, their heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "Did you see the decorations in the ballroom? Absolutely stunning. Catherine outdid herself this year. Everything except those dreadful trees outside. Someone should have torn those down years ago. They're a liability. Oh, but they're part of the estate's charm. Historic, you know. The Whitmore Treehouse Village, built in 1876. Historic or not, they're rotting. I wouldn't let my children near them. The women passed without noticing Maya pressed against the wall in the dim hallway. But their words lingered. The treehouses. Maya had seen them from the car window when they arrived, lit up with Christmas lights like something from a storybook. Her grandmother had told her stories about them once, about how children from another century used to play there, how it was a whole world suspended in the branches. She looked down at her book, then back toward the kitchen where her grandmother was working. She could hear the clatter of dishes, the sharp voice of Helen giving orders. Nobody would miss her for just a few minutes, just long enough to see the treehouses up close. Maya slipped off the stool and walked quietly down the hallway in the opposite direction the women had gone. She found a side door that led to a covered porch, and from there she could see a stone path winding into the gardens. The Christmas lights guided her like breadcrumbs through the snow. The cold bit at her cheeks as she stepped off the porch, but she barely noticed. Before her, rising from the skeletal branches of ancient oaks and maples, the treehouse village emerged from the twilight. 7 structures in total, connected by bridges that swayed slightly in the wind. Some were simple platforms with pitched roofs. Others were elaborate 2-story buildings with carved railings and stained glass windows that caught the Christmas lights and threw colored shadows on the snow below. Maya moved towards them slowly, reverently, her breath making small clouds in the cold air. She reached the base of the largest oak and found a wooden ladder, its rungs worn smooth by a century of climbing hands. A sign hung crookedly from a nail, "Keep out unsafe structure," but the ladder looked solid enough. She tested the first rung with her weight. It held. She climbed. The platform at the top was larger than her grandmother's entire living room. Snow had drifted into one corner, and dead leaves skittered across the floorboards when the wind blew. But the structure itself was sound, the beams thick and strong. Christmas lights had been strung around the railing, their warm glow making everything feel less abandoned, more alive. Maya walked to the edge and looked out over the estate. She could see the mansion below, its windows blazing with light. She could hear the muffled sounds of the party, music and laughter carried on the wind. But up here, she was separate from all that. Up here, she was somewhere else entirely. She turned and explored the platform more carefully. There was a door leading into an enclosed structure, and when she pushed it open, hinges squeaking in protest, she found herself in a small room with built-in benches and shelves. A playroom, maybe, or a reading room. The walls were covered in faded wallpaper, pale blue with silver stars. In the corner, barely visible in the dim light from the Christmas lights outside, was what looked like a toy chest. Maya approached it carefully. The chest was made of cedar, its surface carved with elaborate designs, ships and trees and animals. The brass hinges were tarnished green, but when she lifted the lid, it opened smoothly. Inside were old things, forgotten things, a set of wooden blocks with hand-painted letters, a porcelain doll with cracked cheeks and empty eyes, a stack of yellowed newspapers from 1943, and beneath it all, something that made her pause. The bottom of the chest looked wrong, too shallow. She knocked on it with her knuckles and heard the hollow sound that meant empty space beneath. Her fingers traced the edges of the wooden panel until she found a small notch, barely big enough for her fingernail. She pried at it, gentle but persistent, and the false bottom lifted away. Beneath it was a brass ring, tarnished but solid, attached to what appeared to be a trapdoor cut directly into the floor of the treehouse. Maya sat back on her heels, heart suddenly pounding. She looked around the small room as if someone might be watching, but she was alone. The Christmas lights outside flickered once, then steadied. Somewhere far below, a door slammed and voices called out goodbyes to guests departing early. She should go back. She should find her grandmother and tell her what she'd found. But something in her, that same curiosity that made her read books 3 times and ask questions until adults grew tired of answering, made her reach for the brass ring instead. She pulled. The trapdoor lifted with surprising ease, revealing a ladder leading down into darkness. Not into the empty air beneath the treehouse, but into the ground itself. The treehouse, she realized, must have been built over something already there. A root cellar, maybe, or a storage room. Cold air rushed up from below, carrying the smell of earth and old paper. Maya leaned over the opening and peered down. She could see the ladder disappearing into shadows, and far below, maybe 15 feet down, the faint outline of a floor. She should definitely go back now. This was exactly the kind of thing her grandmother would call dangerous and foolish. But Maya had spent her whole 7 years being careful, being quiet, being good. And something about this moment, suspended between the party she wasn't invited to and a secret buried beneath a forgotten playroom, made her feel like maybe it was okay to be brave instead. She turned around and placed her foot on the first rung of the ladder, then the second, then the third. The wood was solid beneath her hands, reinforced and maintained in a way the outer structure of the treehouse wasn't. Someone had cared about this passage. Someone had wanted it to last. Maya climbed down into the darkness, counting rungs as she went. At 15, her foot touched solid ground. She stood at the bottom of the ladder and waited for her eyes to adjust. Gradually, shapes emerged from the shadows. She was standing in a room, maybe 10 feet square, with stone walls and a low ceiling. The air was dry and cool, preserved somehow against the dampness that should have seeped up from the earth. Along one wall were shelves, and on those shelves were boxes. Dozens of them. Bankers' boxes, the kind her grandmother sometimes brought home from the Historical Society when they were purging old files. Each box was labelled in neat handwriting with dates and numbers. 1976 through 1978, 1979 through 1982, 1983 through 1987. The labels went on, climbing through the decades. The newest box was marked 1994 through 1996. Maya approached the shelves slowly. On the wall opposite the boxes hung photographs in frames, protected behind glass. She could barely make them out in the dim light filtering down from above, but she could see faces, men in suits shaking hands, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, grand buildings with cornerstone dates. In the corner of the room sat an old wooden desk, its surface clean despite the years. On the desk was a leather-bound ledger, closed but clearly waiting. Beside it, a mason jar held pens that looked like they might still write, and next to the jar was a single photograph in a silver frame. Maya picked up the photograph carefully, tilting it toward the light. It showed a man, maybe 50 years old, with kind eyes and grey hair, standing in front of the very treehouse she'd just climbed. He was smiling, one hand resting on a young boy's shoulder. The boy looked about 10, gap-toothed and grinning. On the back of the frame, written in the same neat handwriting as the box labels, it said, James and Robert Whitmore, summer 1975. She set the photograph down gently and reached for the ledger. It was heavy, substantial, the kind of book that held important things. She opened it to the first page. What she saw there, she didn't fully understand. Columns of numbers, names, dates, words like transferred and redirected and allocated. But at the top of the page, in larger letters underlined twice, it said Riverside Community Trust, established January 1976. Maya flipped through more pages. More numbers, more names, some she recognized from signs around town, streets and buildings named after important families. Fletcher Boulevard, Morrison Hospital, the Caldwell Community Center. And next to each name, more numbers. Large numbers. Numbers followed by so many zeros that Maya had to count them twice to be sure. She didn't understand what she was looking at, not really. But she understood enough to know it was important. Important enough to hide. Important enough to preserve in a sealed room beneath a forgotten treehouse. Above her, she heard a sound. Footsteps on the platform, moving quickly. Then her grandmother's voice, tight with panic. Maya, where are you? I'm here, Maya called up through the opening. Down here! The footsteps stopped. Then Rose's face appeared in the opening above, backlit by the Christmas lights, so Maya couldn't see her expression. But she could hear the fear in her voice. Oh my God, baby. What are you doing down there? How did you even find that? There's a ladder, Maya said. And there's stuff down here, Grandma. Lots of stuff. Boxes and books and pictures. Rose was already climbing down, moving with surprising speed despite her age and the stiff back that usually slowed her mornings. She reached the bottom and immediately pulled Maya into a fierce hug. "You scared me half to death," she whispered into Maya's hair. "I went to check on you and you were gone. I thought—" She didn't finish the thought, just held on tighter. "I'm sorry," Maya said, her voice muffled against her grandmother's coat. "I just wanted to see the tree houses. And then I found the door and the ladder and all this." Rose finally released her and looked around the room for the first time. Maya watched her grandmother's face change, confusion giving way to shock, then something that looked almost like recognition. Rose moved toward the shelves, running her fingers along the boxes. She pulled one down, 1976 through 1978, and opened it. Inside were files, hundreds of them, each one labeled with a name and a number. She pulled out a file at random and opened it. Even in the dim light, Maya could see her grandmother's hands start to shake. "What is it, Grandma?" Rose didn't answer immediately. She was reading, her eyes moving rapidly across the page, her mouth forming words she didn't speak aloud. Finally, she looked up at Maya, and there were tears on her cheeks. "I think," Rose said slowly, carefully, as if testing each word before she spoke it, "that you just found something very important. Something people have been looking for a very long time." "What is it?" Rose looked back down at the file in her hands, then around at the boxes, at the photographs on the wall, at the ledger still open on the desk. When she spoke again, her voice was different, stronger, angry in a way Maya had never heard before. "It's proof," she said, "proof of where all the money went." Maya didn't understand, not fully, but she understood enough to know that whatever was in this room, whatever her grandmother had just realized, it was going to change everything. Above them, the party continued. Glasses clinked, the string quartet played. People who had enough money to buy tickets to a charity gala laughed and danced and congratulated themselves on their generosity, never knowing that beneath their feet, in a sealed room under a forgotten treehouse, a 7-year-old girl and her grandmother were holding evidence of the biggest theft their town had ever seen. Rose carefully placed the file back in the box, then turned to Maya. "We need to take some of this with us," she said. "Not all of it, not yet. But enough. Enough to show someone who can help." "Who are we going to show?" Rose thought for a moment, then nodded as if confirming something to herself. "My nephew, Marcus. He's a reporter for the Regional Tribune. If anyone can figure out what to do with this, it's him." They spent the next 20 minutes carefully selecting documents. Rose chose files that seemed representative, that had names Maya recognized, that showed clear patterns of money moving from one place to another. She took photographs of the ledger pages with her old flip phone, the camera flash briefly illuminating the stone walls. She took the framed photograph of James and Robert Whitmore. And she took one box, the one labeled 1994 through 1996, the most recent one, because maybe that's where the truth was clearest. They carried everything up the ladder, Rose going first with the box, then reaching down to help Maya climb up behind her. They closed the trapdoor carefully, replaced the false bottom in the toy chest, and closed that too. They wanted it to look undisturbed, untouched, in case they needed to come back. In case someone else came looking. The walk back to the mansion felt different from the walk out. The Christmas lights seemed harsher now, exposing rather than beautifying. The music from the party sounded hollow. Maya held tight to her grandmother's hand as they slipped back through the side door, down the hallway, into the kitchen where Helen was barking orders about dessert service. Helen barely glanced at them. "You're leaving early," she said to Rose. It wasn't a question. "My granddaughter isn't feeling well," Rose replied, and it wasn't entirely a lie. Maya's face was pale, her eyes too wide. "Fine. You'll be docked for the hours you missed." Rose didn't argue. She just nodded, collected her coat, and guided Maya out through the service entrance to where their old Honda Civic sat in the gravel parking lot reserved for staff. She placed the box carefully in the trunk, covering it with an old blanket. Then she helped Maya into the passenger seat and buckled her seatbelt with shaking hands. They drove home in silence through streets decorated with Christmas lights, past houses where families gathered warm and safe, past the town square where a 40-foot tree sparkled with ornaments and hope. Maya pressed her forehead against the cold window and watched it all pass by, feeling like she'd just stepped out of one world and into another, and there was no going back to the way things were before. When they finally pulled into the driveway of their small rental house on the poor side of town, the side where Christmas decorations were sparse and doors had extra locks, Rose turned off the engine and sat for a long moment without moving. "Maya," she finally said, "what you found tonight, what we took, it's going to cause trouble. Big trouble. Do you understand that?" Maya nodded slowly. "I think so. People are going to be angry. Powerful people. Rich people. They might try to scare us or hurt us." Rose's voice cracked slightly. "I need you to know that if you're scared, if you want to forget about all this and pretend we never found that room, I'll understand. We can put everything back. We can walk away." Maya thought about the ledger with its careful columns of numbers. She thought about the boxes and boxes of files, each one representing something taken, something hidden. She thought about the photograph of James and Robert Whitmore, about how the man had looked kind but sad, like he knew something terrible that he had to document but couldn't stop. She looked at her grandmother, at the woman who cleaned other people's houses so Maya could have food and school supplies and library books, at the woman who tied red ribbons in her hair and brought her to Christmas parties she wasn't invited to because maybe she wanted her granddaughter to see something beautiful. "No," Maya said quietly but firmly. "We can't walk away, because if we do, nobody ever finds out the truth, and that's not right." Rose reached over and took Maya's small hand in both of hers. "When did you get so brave?" she whispered. "You taught me," Maya said simply. They sat together in the car for another moment, hands clasped, breath fogging the windows, making a silent pact that neither of them would break. Then Rose squeezed Maya's hand once more and said, "Okay then, tomorrow we call Marcus. Tonight we rest. And no matter what happens next, we face it together." They got out of the car, retrieved the box from the trunk, and carried it inside their small house, where the heat barely worked and the furniture was second-hand, but the love was fierce and unshakable. Maya helped her grandmother hide the box in the back of the hall closet, behind winter coats and broken umbrellas, somewhere no one would think to look. That night, Maya lay in her narrow bed under a quilt her grandmother had sewn from scraps of fabric, and she thought about secret rooms and stolen money and what it meant to do the right thing even when it was scary. Outside her window, the first snow of December continued to fall, covering the town in white, making everything look clean and new and innocent, when really, beneath the surface, nothing had changed at all. Not yet. But soon, Maya thought as she drifted towards sleep. Soon, everything would be different. Because she'd found something people weren't supposed to find. She'd looked where people weren't supposed to look. And now, there was no putting that knowledge back in the box, no sealing it away beneath a treehouse floor and pretending it didn't exist. The truth, once uncovered, had a way of demanding to be told. And Maya Chen, 7 years old and too observant for her own good, had just become the keeper of a truth that would shake Riverside Junction to its very foundations. What happens next will expose a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of power, reveal why a child's curiosity matters more than adult cynicism, and remind us that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important truths. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. The morning after the Christmas gala, Rose Chen woke before dawn with a headache that felt like guilt and fear pressed into her temples. She lay in bed listening to the house settle around her, the old pipes groaning, the furnace clicking on with its asthmatic wheeze. In the room next door, Maya slept deeply, exhausted from the previous night's discovery. Rose had checked on her twice already, standing in the doorway just to watch her granddaughter's chest rise and fall, to reassure herself that the child was safe, at least for now. But Rose knew that safety was temporary, fragile, built on the hope that no one had seen them at the treehouse, that no one would notice a single box missing from a collection that had sat undisturbed for decades. She got up quietly and padded to the kitchen in her worn slippers. The linoleum was cold even through the fabric. She made coffee in the ancient percolator that had belonged to her mother, watching the dark liquid bubble up through the glass knob on top, and tried to organize her thoughts into something resembling a plan. Marcus. She needed to call her nephew Marcus. He was 32, worked as a reporter for the Regional Tribune, mostly covering city council meetings and high school football games. Not exactly investigative journalism, but he was smart, careful, and most importantly, he was family. He would listen. He would help them figure out what to do with what they'd found. Rose pulled out her old address book, the pages yellowed and filled with crossed-out numbers and updated addresses written in the margins. She found Marcus's number and stared at it for a long time. Once she made this call, once she told him what Maya had discovered, there would be no going back. The secret would be out in the world, beyond her control. Her hand shook as she picked up the phone. She dialed before she could change her mind. Marcus answered on the fourth ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Hello?" "Marcus, it's Aunt Rose." A pause. Then concern sharpening his tone. "Aunt Rose? Is everything okay? It's 6:15 in the morning." "I know, I'm sorry, but I need you to come over today as soon as you can." "What's wrong? Is Maya okay?" "She's fine. We're both fine. But we found something last night. Something important. Something I think you need to see." Another pause. Longer this time. Rose could hear him moving, sitting up probably, becoming alert. "What kind of something?" "The kind I don't want to talk about on the phone," Rose said carefully. "Please, Marcus, can you come?" "I'll be there in an hour," he said without hesitation. Rose hung up and stood in her kitchen, listening to the coffee percolate, and wondered if she'd just made the best decision of her life or the worst. Marcus arrived exactly 63 minutes later, pulling up in his dented Subaru with a travel mug of coffee in one hand and his laptop bag slung over his shoulder. He was tall and thin, with his father's angular features and his mother's steady eyes. Rose watched him from the window as he climbed the porch steps, noting the way he glanced around the neighborhood, already alert, already looking for a story. She opened the door before he could knock. Maya stood behind her in pajama pants and an oversized sweatshirt, her hair still tangled from sleep. "Uncle Marcus," Maya said, her face brightening despite the heaviness of the morning. Marcus smiled at her, genuine warmth breaking through his reporter's mask. "Hey, kiddo, I hear you've had an adventure." "Aunt Rose," he said, turning serious again. "What's this about?" Rose gestured them all to the small kitchen table. She'd already laid out some of the documents they'd taken from the treehouse, arranged them carefully like evidence at a crime scene. The ledger sat in the center, still open to the first page. Marcus set down his coffee and stared at the papers. He didn't touch them yet, just looked. His expression shifted from curiosity to confusion to something sharper, more focused. "Where did you get these?" he asked quietly. "Maya found them," Rose said. "Last night at the Christmas gala. There's a hidden room beneath the old Whitmore treehouse." Marcus looked at Maya, reassessing her. "You found a hidden room?" Maya nodded. "There was a toy chest with a false bottom and underneath was a door. It went down into the ground. There were boxes and boxes of files. We only took one box," Rose added quickly. "And some loose documents. The rest is still there. We didn't want to disturb everything in case we needed to prove it was untouched." Marcus finally reached out and picked up the ledger, handling it carefully as if it might disintegrate under rough touch. He read the first page, then the second, then flipped rapidly through several more. Rose watched his face change as comprehension dawned. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "Do you know what this is?" "I have some idea," Rose said, "but I was hoping you could explain it more clearly." Marcus set the ledger down and ran both hands through his hair. "This is documentation of the Riverside Community Trust. It was established in 1976, supposedly to fund public works projects, community development, things like that. Major donations came from wealthy families, local businesses, even some state grants. I remember when it started, Rose said. Everyone was so excited. They built the new library, renovated Morrison Hospital, put in that beautiful fountain in the town square. Right, Marcus said, but the trust dissolved in 1996. They said the projects were complete, the money had been properly spent, and they closed it down. Clean ending. Everyone involved got plaques and awards. He tapped the ledger with one finger. Except according to this, the money wasn't spent on public projects, at least not all of it, not even most of it. Rose felt her chest tighten. Where did it go? Marcus opened one of the files from the box, scanning quickly. Shell companies, private accounts, real estate purchases under different names. It's all here, every transaction documented. He looked up at Rose, his face pale. Aunt Rose, if this is real, if this is accurate, we're looking at one of the largest cases of embezzlement and fraud in state history. How much? Maya asked quietly from her seat at the table. Marcus flipped through more pages, adding numbers in his head. His lips moved silently. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. At least 200 million, maybe more. Maybe as high as 285 million when you account for the full scope of it. The kitchen fell silent. Outside, a garbage truck rumbled past. Someone's dog barked. Normal sounds of a normal morning in a town that had no idea what had just surfaced in a tiny house on the poor side of the tracks. Who did this? Rose asked. Who took the money? Marcus pulled out another file, this one thicker than the others. Inside were photographs, official documents, contracts with signatures. He spread them across the table like a dealer showing a winning hand. Richard Fletcher, mayor from 1974 to 1992. His son David is the current mayor. James Morrison owned Morrison Development Corporation. He's the one who built half the commercial real estate in this town. Thomas Caldwell, chairman of Riverside Bank and Trust, still is actually. Peter Whitmore. Marcus paused on this one, looking at Maya. He was the owner of the estate where you found all this. He died in 1997. His son, Rose said suddenly. Robert. I remember him. He worked for the Historical Society for years. Quiet man, never married. He died about 10 years ago. Heart attack in his 40s. Robert Whitmore was 37 when he died, Marcus said, reading from a document. He worked as an archivist, and according to this, he's the one who documented everything. Every transaction, every lie, every dollar stolen. His father was part of the scheme, but Robert discovered it and spent years secretly recording proof. Maya reached out and touched the photograph of James and Robert Whitmore that Rose had brought from the underground room. He looked sad, she said, in the picture, like he knew something terrible. He did, Marcus said quietly. He knew his father was a thief, and instead of confronting him directly, instead of destroying the family name publicly, he created an archive. He preserved the evidence and hid it, maybe hoping someone would find it someday. Someone who could use it to make things right. Rose felt tears prick her eyes. Those poor people. Everyone in this town who lost money, who thought their donations went to help the community. And all this time it was just stolen. Not just donations, Marcus said, his voice hardening. Look at this file. Pension funds. The town employees' pension fund was part of the trust. They were told it was being invested to grow the fund, to secure retirements. But the money was siphoned off, redirected. He pulled out a list of names. These are people who lost their pensions, teachers, firefighters, public works employees. They were told the fund had failed due to bad investments and economic downturn. They lost everything they'd worked for their entire lives. Rose felt something shift inside her. Not just fear anymore. Anger. Hot and righteous and clarifying. She thought of the women she'd worked alongside for years, cleaning houses because their pensions had vanished. She thought of the man down the street, who'd been a firefighter for 30 years and now stocked shelves at the grocery store to afford his medications. We have to do something, she said firmly. We can't just hide this again. I know, Marcus said, but we have to be careful, really careful. The people involved in this, some of them are still alive, still powerful. David Fletcher is the mayor. Thomas Caldwell runs the biggest bank in 3 counties. James Morrison's company is worth millions. They'll come after us, Rose said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Marcus agreed. They will. Once this goes public, once we start making accusations, they'll use every resource they have to discredit us, threaten us, maybe worse. Maya had been quiet, listening with that intense focus she brought to everything. Now she spoke up, her voice small but steady. But if we don't tell, then they got away with it. All those people who lost money, they never find out the truth. That's not fair. Marcus looked at his young cousin with something like awe. No, it's not fair. You're absolutely right. He turned back to Rose. If we do this, we do it right. We document everything. We make copies of copies. We build a case so solid they can't tear it down. And we find allies, people who can help protect us when the backlash starts. How do we start? Rose asked. Marcus pulled his laptop from his bag and opened it on the table. We start by cross-referencing everything. Every name, every transaction, every dollar. We verify that what's in these documents matches public records, tax filings, property deeds. We prove it's real. And then? Then we go to my editor, and after that, probably the FBI. They worked through the morning and into the afternoon. Marcus photographed every page of the ledger, every document in the box. He created spreadsheets, tracking money flows, connecting names to shell companies to property purchases. Rose made phone calls to old friends, asking careful questions about the pension fund collapse, about who had been involved in the trust, gathering oral history to support the documentary evidence. Maya sat at the table with a notebook, creating her own record. She drew pictures of the treehouse, of the hidden door, of the room beneath. She wrote down everything she remembered about finding it, the time, the weather, what she'd touched, what she'd seen. Marcus had told her that her account would be important, that she was a witness, and she took the responsibility seriously. By 3 p.m, Marcus pushed back from the table and rubbed his eyes. I need to verify some of this with public records. The county clerk's office should have property deeds and tax information, and I want to check newspaper archives, see what was reported about the trust back when it was active. How long will that take? Rose asked. A few days, maybe a week if I'm thorough. And I need to be thorough. We get one shot at this. If I publish something that's wrong, even slightly wrong, they'll use it to discredit everything else. He started packing up his laptop, but paused and looked at Rose seriously. Aunt Rose, you need to be careful. Don't talk about this with anyone. Don't go back to the treehouse. And if anything weird happens, anyone asks strange questions or you notice someone following you, call me immediately. You're scaring me, Rose said quietly. Good, Marcus replied. You should be scared, but not so scared that you back down, just scared enough to be smart. After Marcus left, Rose made dinner in a daze, moving through familiar motions while her mind spun with implications. Maya set the table without being asked, then helped wash dishes afterward, both of them moving in companionable silence. That night, Rose couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, listening to every sound, every car that passed, every creak of the house settling. Around midnight, she got up and checked all the locks twice. She pulled the curtains tight. She moved the box of documents from the hall closet to under her bed, then moved it again to the back of Maya's closet behind stuffed animals and old toys. She was being paranoid, she told herself. Nobody knew what they'd found. Nobody was watching them. But she couldn't shake the feeling that they'd crossed some invisible line, that they'd stumbled into something much bigger and more dangerous than she'd initially understood. 3 days later, Marcus called with an update. His voice was tight with controlled excitement. I've verified about 60% of the documents so far, he said. Property records match. Shell company registrations match. The money trail is real, Aunt Rose, all of it. That's good, right? It's incredible. But I found something else, something that makes this even bigger. Rose's stomach clenched. What? The pension fund that was looted. It wasn't just Riverside Junction employees. The trust had somehow gained control of pension funds from 3 other towns in the county. That means the number of victims is probably closer to 3,000 people. 3,000 people who lost their retirement savings. Rose sat down hard on the couch. Oh my God, there's more. I checked death records. At least 17 people who lost their pensions died within 5 years of the fund collapse. I'm looking into causes of death, but some of them, Rose, some of them were suicides. The room seemed to tilt. Rose gripped the phone with both hands. They killed people. Maybe not directly, but they destroyed lives and people couldn't recover. Yes, Marcus said quietly. That's exactly what happened. And that's why we can't let this stay buried. When are you going to publish? Soon. But I want to talk to some of the victims first. Get their stories. Make this human, not just numbers on a page. Can you help me with that? You know people who lost their pensions. Rose thought of her friend Dorothy, who'd taught second grade for 33 years and now lived in a studio apartment above the laundromat. She thought of Ben Martinez, who'd been a paramedic and now delivered pizzas at 62. She thought of at least a dozen others she'd met over the years, people who'd worked hard and played by the rules and lost everything anyway. I can help, she said. I know exactly who you need to talk to. Over the next week, Rose became a quiet investigator, reaching out to old friends and acquaintances, arranging meetings between them and Marcus. Each conversation added another layer to the story, another face to the statistics. Dorothy, who cried as she explained how she'd lost her house and had to move in with her daughter's family, sleeping on a fold-out couch at 70 years old. Ben Martinez, who showed Marcus hospital bills he couldn't pay and medication he'd started taking in half doses to make it last longer. Each story hit harder than the last. Each person Marcus interviewed had the same question. How did this happen? Who took our money? And now, finally, Marcus could answer them. But the investigation wasn't without consequences. Rose started noticing things, small things that might mean nothing or might mean everything. A car that seemed to be parked on their street more often than made sense. Someone asking questions about her at the grocery store, casual inquiries about where she worked, who she lived with. Once she came home to find the back door lock scratched, as if someone had tried to pick it but given up. She called Marcus immediately. I think someone's watching us. Pack a bag, Marcus said without hesitation. Not everything, just enough for a few days. You and Maya are going to stay with me until we go public with this. Marcus, I can't just leave. I have work. Maya has school. Call in sick. Keep Maya home. Aunt Rose, I'm serious. If they know you have evidence, if they even suspect it, they'll try to get it back. And they won't ask nicely. Rose felt ice slide down her spine. How would they know? I don't know. Maybe they've been monitoring the estate. Maybe someone saw you that night. Maybe they've been watching the Historical Society for years just in case. But we can't take chances. That afternoon, Rose packed 2 bags and drove Maya across town to Marcus's apartment, a second-floor walk-up above a hardware store. Marcus had already prepared the small guest room, moving his exercise equipment out and bringing in a cot for Maya. I'm sorry it's not much, he said as he helped carry their bags up the stairs. It's perfect, Rose said, meaning it. We're safe here. That's what matters. That night, while Maya slept on the cot and Rose dozed fitfully on Marcus's couch, Marcus sat at his dining room table writing. He'd been working on the article for days, but now he was refining it, tightening it, making sure every word was exactly right. The headline read, Hidden Archive Reveals $285 million Fraud in Riverside Community Trust. Beneath it, the subheading, Documents Found by 7-year-old Girl Expose Decades-Old Scheme That Destroyed Thousands of Lives. He wrote about the trust's formation, about the promises made to the community. He wrote about the shell companies and fake invoices, about money that supposedly went to public works but actually went into private pockets. He detailed each major transaction, named each person involved, living or dead. He included quotes from victims, from Dorothy and Ben and others, people who'd lost everything and never knew why. And he wrote about Maya, about a curious child who climbed into a treehouse on a cold December night and found what powerful men had spent decades hiding. About innocence uncovering corruption. About the smallest voice in the room turning out to be the most important one. At 2 in the morning, he finished. He read the article through 3 times, checking facts, verifying quotes, making sure the legal language was precise. Then he attached all the supporting documents, the photographs of ledger pages, the scanned files, the verification of public records. He composed an email to his editor with the subject line, "Urgent, major investigative story, ready for review." His finger hovered over the send button. Once he pressed it, there was no taking it back. The secret would be out. The powerful men named in the article would mobilize their resources to fight back. Rose and Maya would be in danger. He might lose his job. He might face legal threats, intimidation, worse. But behind him, sleeping on his couch, was his aunt who'd worked her fingers raw for years cleaning other people's houses. And in the next room was a 7-year-old girl who'd been brave enough to climb into darkness and curious enough to ask why things were hidden. They'd trusted him with this. They'd trusted him to do the right thing. Marcus pressed send. The email disappeared into the digital void, carrying with it 285 million reasons why powerful people slept well at night and poor people didn't. But not anymore. Not after tomorrow. The response came faster than Marcus expected. His editor, Sarah Chen, called him at 6:30 in the morning, waking him from the restless sleep he'd finally fallen into around 4. "Tell me this is real," she said without preamble. "Tell me you have actual evidence and this isn't some elaborate hoax." "It's real," Marcus said, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "I've verified every document, cross-referenced with public records, interviewed multiple victims. It's all there." "Jesus Christ, Marcus. Do you understand what you've handed me? This is the biggest story this paper has published in 50 years. "I know. It's also the most dangerous. We're accusing sitting public officials of massive fraud. We're naming prominent business leaders. They're going to come after us with everything they have." "I know that too." A long pause. Then Sarah's voice, quieter but firm. "I'm running it. Front page, Sunday edition. That gives us 2 days to prepare for the fallout. I'm looping in our legal team now. They'll want to talk to you. Probably your aunt and the girl too." "Her name is Maya." "Maya. Right. Marcus, you need to keep them safe. Once this publishes, people are going to want to talk to them. Press, police, probably federal investigators, and the people we're exposing, they're going to want to silence them." "They're staying with me. I'm not letting them out of my sight." "Good. Come into the office this morning. We have work to do." Marcus hung up and sat on the edge of his bed, the weight of what he'd set in motion settling over him like a physical presence. In the living room, he could hear his aunt moving around, starting coffee. Through the thin wall, Maya's voice hummed a song she'd learned at school. Normal sounds, innocent sounds. He hoped they could stay that way. The next 2 days were a blur of activity. Marcus met with the Tribune's legal team, a pair of sharp-eyed attorneys who went through every document with surgical precision. They asked pointed questions, poked holes in assumptions, demanded additional verification for anything that seemed even slightly ambiguous. "This is good work," the lead attorney, a woman named Patricia Voss, finally said. "Thorough, well documented. But you need to understand, the moment this publishes, you'll be sued. Multiple lawsuits, probably. Defamation, libel, whatever they can throw at you, hoping something sticks." "Will they win?" Marcus asked. "No, not if the evidence holds up. But they don't need to win. They just need to make it expensive and time-consuming enough that you give up. That's how powerful people protect themselves." "I'm not giving up," Patricia smiled thinly. "I believe you. But your aunt and the child, they need to be prepared too. This is going to be hard on them." That evening, Marcus sat down with Rose and Maya at his small dining table. He'd ordered pizza, and they ate while he explained what was going to happen. "The article comes out Sunday," he said. "Front page. After that, things are going to get intense. There will be reporters wanting to interview you. Police will probably want statements, and the people we're exposing, they're going to fight back." Maya looked up from her slice of pepperoni. "Will they hurt us?" Marcus glanced at Rose, then back at Maya. He didn't want to lie to her. "I don't think so. Not physically, but they might say mean things about us. They might try to make people think we're lying or that we did something wrong. We have to be ready for that. But we're not lying, Maya said. I found the room. Grandma took pictures. You checked everything. I know, sweetheart. And the truth is on our side. But sometimes people don't want to believe the truth when it's uncomfortable, when it means admitting they were wrong or that they trusted bad people. Rose reached over and squeezed Maya's hand. We're going to be okay. We're together and we're doing the right thing. That's what matters. Saturday night, Marcus barely slept. He kept checking his phone, refreshing his email, waiting for some last-minute crisis that would delay publication. But nothing came. At midnight, he received a text from Sarah. Press run starting now. No turning back. Marcus walked to the window of his apartment and looked out over the sleeping town. Somewhere out there, in their comfortable homes behind gates and security systems, the people named in his article slept soundly, not knowing that in a few hours their world would explode. He thought about justice, about how it was supposed to be blind, equal, available to everyone. But he knew it wasn't. Justice usually bent toward the powerful, toward the ones who could afford lawyers and influence and patience. But not this time. This time, justice was coming, because a 7-year-old girl had been curious enough to open a door that everyone else had forgotten existed. Sunday morning dawned cold and clear. Marcus was awake before sunrise, pacing his apartment, checking his phone obsessively. At 5 a.m., he drove to the nearest convenience store that sold newspapers. He was the first customer of the day, and he grabbed 3 copies of the Regional Tribune from the stack by the door. There it was, front page, above the fold, in bold letters that filled half the page. Hidden Archive reveals $285 million fraud. Below the headline was a photograph Marcus had taken of the ledger, opened to show columns of numbers and transactions. And beside it, a smaller photo of the Whitmore estate, with the treehouse visible in the background, his byline, his words, his responsibility. Marcus bought the papers and drove back to his apartment with his hands shaking on the steering wheel. By the time he arrived, his phone was already ringing. It didn't stop for 3 days. What happens next will turn this quiet town upside down, reveal truths that shatter decades of carefully maintained lies, and remind us why sometimes the smallest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. The phones started ringing before sunrise. First Marcus's cell, then the Tribune office line, then the main switchboard. By 7 a.m., news vans from 3 different networks had parked outside the newspaper building, satellite dishes extending toward the grey December sky like mechanical flowers seeking light. By 8, the mayor's office had issued a statement calling the article reckless and irresponsible. By 9, Thomas Caldwell's attorneys had filed a defamation lawsuit seeking $10 million in damages. And by 10 a.m., Rose Chen's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She answered cautiously, standing in Marcus's small kitchen while Maya ate cereal at the table. Hello? Is this Rose Chen? The voice was male, older, with the careful diction of someone used to being obeyed. Who's asking? My name is David Fletcher. I'm the mayor of Riverside Junction. I believe you and your granddaughter have made some very serious accusations about my family. Rose's hand tightened on the phone. Maya looked up, sensing tension. Her spoon paused halfway to her mouth. We didn't make accusations. We found evidence. There's a difference. Fletcher's voice remained calm, almost friendly, which made it more unsettling. Miss Chen, I understand you work for the Historical Society, or rather, you did. I've just been informed that your employment has been terminated, effective immediately. Breaking and entering, theft of property, violation of trust. Those are the official reasons. Rose felt heat flood her face. I didn't steal anything. That estate is public property now. The contents of that estate, including any rooms or structures on the grounds, belong to the Historical Society. You removed documents without authorization. That's theft, Miss Chen. We could press charges. Go ahead, Rose said, her voice steadier than she felt. Press charges. Because then we'll have to present those documents in court, as evidence, under oath. Is that really what you want? A long pause. When Fletcher spoke again, the friendly veneer had cracked slightly. You don't understand what you're interfering with. That money, that trust, it built this town. It created jobs, infrastructure, opportunities. Yes, some funds were redirected. Yes, some people benefited more than others. But the net result was positive. This town thrived. People lost their pensions, Rose said quietly. They lost their homes. Some of them died. You call that positive? Unfortunate casualties of economic restructuring. It happens. But dragging all of this up now, 30 years later, what does it accomplish? You're destroying reputations, destabilizing the community, and for what? Money that's long gone, people who are already dead. Justice, Rose said simply. It accomplishes justice. Justice is expensive, Miss Chen. Can you afford it? Can your granddaughter? The implied threat hung in the air like smoke. Rose looked at Maya, who had stopped eating entirely and was watching her grandmother with wide, worried eyes. Don't call this number again, Rose said and hung up. Her hands were shaking. She set the phone down on the counter and gripped the edge, trying to steady herself. Maya slipped out of her chair and came to stand beside her, pressing against Rose's side. Was that a bad man? Maya asked quietly. Yes, Rose said. That was a bad man pretending to be reasonable. Marcus emerged from his bedroom, already dressed, laptop bag over his shoulder. I heard some of that. Was it Fletcher? Rose nodded. He fired me and threatened us. Record everything, Marcus said immediately. If he calls again, if anyone calls, record it. Those threats become evidence. Evidence of what? Witness intimidation, obstruction. It's illegal, and it helps our case. He checked his watch. I have to get to the office. Sarah wants to do a follow-up piece for tomorrow's edition, and the FBI field office in Springfield just called. They want copies of everything. The FBI? Rose felt a flutter of hope. That's good, right? It's very good. It means federal investigation, which means these people can't hide behind local connections or friendly judges. But it also means you and Maya will probably have to give formal statements, maybe testify eventually if it goes to trial. Maya's hand found Rose's. Will we have to talk to a lot of people? Marcus knelt down to her level. Probably yes, but I'll be with you, and your grandma, and we'll make sure you're safe and that people are respectful. You're not in trouble, Maya. You're a witness. There's a difference. After Marcus left, Rose tried to create some normalcy for Maya. They watched cartoons. They baked cookies using a mix Rose found in Marcus's pantry. They read books. But every time Rose's phone rang or a car door slammed outside, they both tensed, waiting for the next threat, the next consequence of truth-telling. The call came at 2 p.m., but it wasn't threatening. It was Dorothy, Rose's old friend who'd taught second grade for 33 years. Rose? Oh my God, Rose, I just read the paper. That was you? You found the proof? Maya found it, Rose said, throat tight with emotion. I just recognized what it was. Rose, I'm crying. I'm sitting at my daughter's kitchen table, and I'm crying because for the first time in 20 years, I know why. I know why I lost everything. I know it wasn't my fault, wasn't bad investments or bad luck. It was stolen. Someone took it. I'm so sorry, Dorothy. Don't apologize. Thank you. Thank you for not looking away, for not keeping quiet. Dorothy's voice broke. I thought I was going to die without ever knowing the truth. That call was followed by another, and another. By evening, Rose had spoken to 11 different people, all victims of the pension fund collapse, all crying or angry or grateful, or all three at once. Each conversation added weight to what they'd done, made it more real, more important. But not everyone called to say thank you. At 7 p.m., someone threw a brick through Marcus's apartment window. The glass exploded inward, scattering across the living room floor where Maya had been playing with dolls just minutes before. Rose had called her into the kitchen to help with dinner, a timing that might have saved her from injury. Marcus called the police immediately. 2 officers arrived within 10 minutes, took a report, and promised to increase patrols in the area. but Rose could see in their eyes they thought this was going to get worse before it got better. "Maybe you should leave town for a while," one officer suggested quietly. "Visit family somewhere else, just until things cool down." "We're not leaving," Rose said firmly. "This is our home." After the police left, Marcus taped cardboard over the broken window and swept up the glass. Maya helped, carefully picking up the smallest pieces and dropping them into a trash bag. She was quiet, withdrawn in a way she hadn't been even after finding the underground room. That night, Rose lay on Marcus's couch with Maya curled against her side, and she wondered if she'd made the right choice. If protecting her granddaughter meant running instead of standing. If justice was worth the price they were being asked to pay. She must have dozed off because the next thing she knew, sunlight was streaming through the cardboard-covered window, and Marcus was in the kitchen making coffee. The smell woke her fully, and she carefully extracted herself from Maya's embrace and joined her nephew. "Morning," he said, handing her a cup. "You made the national news." He turned his laptop so she could see. CNN's website had a story. "Small town rocked by massive fraud revelation. 7-year-old's discovery exposes decades of corruption." Below it, links to similar stories on every major news outlet. "We're famous," Rose said weakly. "You're important," Marcus corrected. "There's a difference. And Rose, this is bigger than I thought. I got calls yesterday from reporters in 3 other states. Apparently, similar trust schemes were running in at least 6 other towns in the region during the same time period. Different names, different people, but the same structure. Your discovery might expose a network of fraud that spans multiple states." Rose set down her coffee cup with a shaking hand. "How is that possible? How could something this big stay hidden for so long?" "Because the people who did it were smart. They spread it out over decades. They mixed legitimate projects with theft. They targeted pension funds and charitable trusts, places where oversight was minimal and people trusted the managers, and they counted on shame. On victims being too embarrassed to ask questions or compare notes. But now they know," Rose said. "Because of what Maya found, now everyone knows." The backlash intensified throughout Monday. The mayor held a press conference denying all allegations and calling for an investigation into how the documents were obtained. Thomas Caldwell released a statement through his attorneys claiming the ledger was a forgery, that Robert Whitmore had been mentally unstable, and that his so-called evidence was the delusion of a troubled man. But the FBI wasn't buying it. By Tuesday afternoon, federal agents had descended on the Whitmore estate and excavated the hidden room beneath the treehouse. They removed every box, every file, every piece of evidence Robert Whitmore had carefully preserved. They brought in forensics teams to verify the age of the documents, the authenticity of the ink, the fingerprints on the pages, and they started making arrests. The first was Thomas Caldwell, led out of his bank in handcuffs while news cameras captured every moment. The charge was wire fraud, with more charges pending. The second was James Morrison, arrested at his home in the early morning hours. David Fletcher wasn't arrested, not yet, but federal agents spent 6 hours at his office seizing records and computer files. Rose watched it all on the news from Marcus's apartment, Maya beside her, both of them transfixed by the sight of powerful men being held accountable. "They're really in trouble," Maya said softly. "Because of what we found." "Yes," Rose agreed. "They are." "Good," Maya said simply, and Rose couldn't argue with that. But the consequences weren't only legal. The town of Riverside Junction was fracturing along fault lines that had existed for decades, but remained hidden beneath a surface of civility. Those who'd lost pensions and savings rallied behind Rose and Maya, calling them heroes. Those who'd benefited from the development projects funded by stolen money, those whose property values had increased or whose businesses had thrived, they called Rose and Maya troublemakers, liars, destroyers of the community. The elementary school where Maya had attended became a battleground. Some parents didn't want their children associating with her. Others organized a support rally, showing up at the school with signs reading, "We stand with Maya," and "Children tell truth, adults make excuses." The principal, a kind woman named Margaret Hayes, called Rose on Wednesday afternoon. Miss Chen, I want you to know that Maya is welcome here. She's safe here. We've had to have some difficult conversations with parents, but my staff and I are united in supporting her. Thank you, Rose said, throat tight. That means more than you know. She's a brave girl. What she did, what you both did, it took courage. Don't let anyone make you doubt that. The support came from unexpected places. Ben Martinez, the former paramedic who now delivered pizzas, organized a fundraiser to help cover Rose's lost income. Within 3 days, they'd raised $8,000 from small donations, $5 and $10 and $20 from people who understood what it meant to struggle. Dorothy set up a meeting at the community center, inviting all the pension fund victims she could find. 47 people showed up, ranging in age from late 50s to mid-80s. Rose and Maya attended, sitting in a circle of folding chairs while people told their stories. A man named Henry, who'd been a firefighter for 28 years, described watching his wife die of cancer because they couldn't afford her medication after the pension collapsed. I worked every day of my life, he said, voice breaking. Never asked for handouts, just wanted what I was promised, what I earned, and they took it. They just took it. A woman named Patricia, former teacher, explained how she'd had to move in with her son's family and sleep in their garage because she couldn't afford rent. I taught their children, she said, pointing in the direction of the wealthy neighborhood where the Fletchers and Caldwells lived. I taught their children to read and write and be good people, and they stole from me. Each story was similar. Each person had lost everything and never understood why until 3 days ago when a newspaper article finally gave them answers. At the end of the meeting, Dorothy stood up and looked at Rose and Maya. I just want to say thank you to both of you. You gave us something we thought we'd never have. You gave us the truth. And you gave us hope that maybe, just maybe, things can still be made right. The room erupted in applause. Maya, sitting beside her grandmother, blushed and ducked her head, but Rose saw the small smile on her face, the way her shoulders straightened slightly. Her granddaughter was learning what it meant to stand for something bigger than yourself. That evening, as they walked back to Marcus's apartment through streets decorated with Christmas lights and holiday cheer that felt surreal given everything happening, a car pulled up beside them. Rose tensed, ready to run, to protect Maya. But the woman who got out was young, maybe 30, wearing a business suit and holding a briefcase. Miss Chen, my name is Jennifer Holt. I'm an attorney with the State Attorney General's office. I've been asked to speak with you about victim restitution. Restitution? Rose repeated. Yes. If the federal case moves forward, and it looks like it will, there's a possibility of recovering some of the stolen funds, seized assets, penalty fees, things like that. The money would be distributed to verified victims of the fraud. I wanted to make sure you and others who lost pensions are part of that process. Rose felt something loosen in her chest, something she hadn't realized she'd been holding tight. People could get their money back? Some of it. Not all. Probably not even most. But something. Enough to make a difference. Jennifer looked down at Maya. And you must be the young lady who found the evidence. Thank you. You've helped a lot of people. Maya nodded solemnly. You're welcome. After Jennifer left, contact information exchanged and promises made to follow up, Rose and Maya continued their walk in silence. But it was a different kind of silence now. Hopeful, determined. They were halfway to the apartment when Maya spoke. Grandma, are we heroes? Rose thought about that question carefully. I don't know about heroes, but we did the right thing, even when it was scary, even when people told us not to. That's something to be proud of. I am proud, Maya said. Are you? Yes, baby. I'm very proud. Of both of us. By Thursday, the story had grown beyond Riverside Junction. Federal investigators had confirmed that similar fraud schemes had operated in 7 other towns across 3 states, all connected through a network of shell companies and falsified investment funds. The estimated total theft was now approaching $500 million. Victim counts were climbing into the thousands. And at the center of it all, in every news story, every press conference, every federal statement, was the mention of a 7-year-old girl who climbed into a treehouse and refused to look away from what she found. Marcus published a follow-up piece on Thursday afternoon, this one focusing on the victims and what restitution might look like. He included interviews with Dorothy, Henry, Patricia, and 15 others. He detailed the human cost of white-collar crime, the lives destroyed not by violence, but by calculated theft disguised as civic duty. The response was overwhelming. The Tribune's website crashed from traffic. Marcus's editor called it the most read story in the paper's 112-year history. But with greater visibility came greater danger. On Thursday night, someone slashed the tires on Marcus's car. On Friday morning, Rose's bank account was frozen due to what the bank called suspicious activity, though no explanation was provided. On Friday afternoon, Maya's school received a bomb threat, though it turned out to be a hoax. Each incident was reported to police. Each one was documented. But Rose could feel the pressure building, the sense that the powerful people they'd exposed were getting desperate. Friday evening, Marcus sat with Rose at his kitchen table after Maya had gone to bed. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, but there was also something fierce in his expression. "The FBI wants us to testify at the grand jury next week," he said. "You, me, and Maya. They're moving fast, trying to get indictments before anyone can destroy more evidence or flee." "Will Maya have to testify in front of the actual trial?" Rose asked, worry creeping into her voice. "Maybe, probably, but they'll protect her. Closed courtroom, prosecutors who specialize in working with child witnesses. And Rose, she's the key witness. She found the room. She can describe it, authenticate that the documents came from there. Without her testimony, defense attorneys might successfully argue the evidence was planted." Rose nodded slowly, understanding the weight being placed on her granddaughter's small shoulders. "She can handle it. She's stronger than people think." "She gets that from you," Marcus said simply. Saturday morning brought a different kind of visitor. Rose opened the door to find a camera crew from 60 Minutes standing in the hallway, correspondent and all. "Miss Chen? I'm Amanda Pierce. We'd like to do a story about you and Maya, about what you found and what it's meant for the community." Rose almost said no, almost closed the door on national television and the exposure that would bring. But then she thought about Dorothy and Henry and Patricia and all the others who'd spent decades not knowing why their lives had fallen apart. "Okay," she said, "but you talked to Maya gently, and you let me be there the whole time." They filmed in Marcus's living room, improvised studio lights set up around the couch where Rose and Maya sat side by side. Amanda asked questions with genuine curiosity, not the gotcha journalism Rose had feared. "Maya, can you tell me what made you go to the treehouse that night?" Maya thought about it, her face serious. "I wanted to see something beautiful, and I did. The Christmas lights were pretty, but then I found something else, something that wasn't beautiful. Something sad." "Sad how?" "Because someone had to hide it, because people did bad things and nobody knew. That's sad." "Do you understand what you found? What those papers meant?" Maya nodded. "They showed that people stole money that was supposed to help other people. My grandma says that's called embezzlement." "That's a big word." "I looked it up," Maya said simply. "After we found the room. I wanted to understand." Amanda turned to Rose. "Miss Chen, you've lost your job. You've received threats. Your home was vandalized. Do you regret finding that evidence?" Rose looked at her granddaughter, then back at the camera. "No, not for a second, because what we found wasn't ours to keep quiet about. It belonged to all the people who lost everything and never knew why. We were just the messengers." "What do you say to people who claim you should have left the past buried? That bringing this up now only causes pain?" "I say the pain was already there. It's been there for 30 years. We just finally gave it a name and a face. And that's the first step toward healing." The interview lasted 2 hours. When it was over, Amanda shook both their hands. "This airs in 3 weeks, but I want you to know, what you've done, it matters. It really matters. After the crew left, Rose and Maya sat together on the couch, exhausted but somehow lighter. They'd told their story. They'd owned it. And now the world would hear it from their own mouths, in their own words. That night, Rose's phone rang with another unfamiliar number. She almost didn't answer, tired of threats and intimidation. But something made her pick up. "Miss Chen? This is Special Agent Donald Torres with the FBI. I'm calling to inform you that we've just arrested David Fletcher. Federal charges of conspiracy to commit fraud and obstruction of justice. I wanted you to hear it from us before you saw it on the news." Rose felt tears spring to her eyes. "Thank you. Thank you for telling me." "No, Miss Chen, thank you. You and your granddaughter, you've helped expose one of the largest financial fraud cases we've seen in decades. What you did took courage, real courage." After she hung up, Rose went to check on Maya, who was sleeping soundly in the small guest room, arms wrapped around a stuffed elephant. She stood in the doorway watching her granddaughter breathe, this small person who'd changed everything just by being curious and brave. Sunday morning, exactly 1 week after Marcus's article had first published, Rose and Maya walked to the corner store to buy newspapers. The owner, Mr. Patel, refused to let them pay. "No charge," he said firmly. "What you did standing up to those people, that took guts. You're good for this town, even if some people are too stupid to see it." They walked home with papers tucked under Rose's arm and hot chocolate warming their hands, purchased by Mr. Patel's insistence. The December morning was cold but clear, and the Christmas decorations that had seemed surreal last week now felt almost hopeful. "Grandma?" Maya asked as they walked. "When this is all over, when the bad people go to jail and people get their money back, what happens then?" "Then we go home," Rose said. "Back to our house, back to normal life." "Will it be the same?" Rose thought about that. "No, baby. It won't be the same. Because we're not the same. We know things now. About courage and justice and standing up even when it's hard. And that changes you." "Good changes?" "The best kind," Rose said, squeezing her granddaughter's hand. They turned the corner onto Marcus's street and stopped short. Parked in front of the building were 3 news vans, a police car, and at least a dozen people holding signs. Rose tensed, expecting hostility, but as they got closer, she could read what the signs said. "Thank you, Maya and Rose. Truth matters. Heroes don't wear capes, they climb tree houses." Dorothy was there, and Ben Martinez and Henry and Patricia and at least 20 others Rose recognized from the victims' meeting. They were standing in the cold December morning, holding signs, waiting. When they saw Rose and Maya approaching, they began to applaud. Not wild applause, but steady, respectful, grateful. The sound of recognition, the sound of being seen. Maya pressed against Rose's side, overwhelmed. Rose wrapped an arm around her granddaughter and felt her own tears start to fall. Not from sadness or fear, but from the pure, overwhelming emotion of knowing that what they'd done mattered, that their courage had meant something to people who needed hope. Marcus came out of the building, camera in hand, documenting the moment. He caught Rose's eye and nodded, a silent acknowledgement of everything they'd been through, everything still to come. The police officer approached, a young woman with kind eyes. "Miss Chen, I'm Officer Sarah Walsh. I've been assigned to provide security for you and your family until the trial. You won't see me all the time, but I'll be nearby, making sure you're safe." "Thank you," Rose managed to say. "No," Officer Walsh replied. "Thank you. My mother lost her pension in this. She's been working at Walmart for 15 years because of it. What you did, you gave her answers. You gave us all answers." The crowd stayed for another hour, people coming up one by one to shake Rose's hand, to thank Maya, to share their stories and their gratitude. When they finally dispersed, promising to see each other at the grand jury hearings, Rose and Maya climbed the stairs to Marcus's apartment, feeling something they hadn't felt in weeks. Safe, supported, understood. That evening, as they sat together eating takeout Chinese food and watching a Christmas movie, Rose looked at her granddaughter and her nephew and felt a swell of pride so intense it almost hurt. They'd done it. Against all odds, against powerful opposition, against threats and intimidation and fear, they'd done it. They'd stood up. They'd told the truth. And they'd reminded their community that justice wasn't just for the wealthy and connected. It was for everyone, especially for those brave enough to climb into tree houses and curious enough to ask why doors were hidden. Maya fell asleep during the movie, curled against Rose's side, and Rose let her rest there, not wanting to move, not wanting to break this moment of peace. Tomorrow would bring more challenges. The grand jury testimony, more news coverage, probably more threats. But tonight they were safe, they were together, and they had stood for something that mattered. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The federal courthouse in Springfield stood 12 stories tall, all glass and steel, and the kind of modern architecture that was meant to intimidate. Rose held Maya's hand as they climbed the wide steps, Marcus on Maya's other side, forming a protective triangle around the small girl who carried the weight of a $285 million case on her narrow shoulders. It was Tuesday morning, exactly 11 days after Marcus's article had first published. The grand jury had been convened with unusual speed, prosecutors pushing hard before any more evidence could disappear or witnesses could be pressured into silence. Maya would testify first, while her memory of finding the hidden room was still fresh, still untainted by the media storm that had followed. Inside, the building was all marble floors and hushed voices. Security was tight. Metal detectors, bag searches, federal marshals stationed at every corridor. Rose noticed Officer Sarah Walsh nearby, in plain clothes but clearly on duty, her eyes constantly scanning for threats. A woman in a crisp navy suit approached them. "Miss Chen? I'm Assistant U.S. Attorney Rachel Mendez. I'll be handling Maya's testimony today." Rose shook her hand, assessing her with a grandmother's protective instinct. Rachel seemed young, maybe 35, but her handshake was firm and her eyes were kind. "How long will this take?" Rose asked. "Probably 2 hours, maybe less. I'll ask Maya to describe finding the room, what she saw, what she touched. The grand jury may have some questions, but I promise we'll keep it appropriate for her age. She's not on trial here. She's helping us build one." Maya, who'd been silent since they entered the building, finally spoke. "Will the bad people be there?" "No, sweetheart." Rachel knelt to Maya's level. "Grand jury is just regular citizens and prosecutors. The people who did the bad things don't get to be in the room. This is just you telling the truth to people who want to help." Maya nodded, her small face serious. "Okay, I can do that." They were led to a private waiting room with uncomfortable chairs and old magazines. Marcus paced. Rose sat perfectly still, one hand clutching Maya's, the other gripping her purse so tight her knuckles were white. Maya swung her legs, humming softly to herself, and Rose marveled at her granddaughter's composure. At 9:30, Rachel returned. "We're ready for Maya." Rose started to stand, but Rachel gently stopped her. "Just Maya for now. You'll be able to join us after her initial testimony. It's standard procedure, but I promise, she'll be fine." Rose looked at her granddaughter, this 7-year-old who'd already been so brave, and felt her heart fracture slightly. "You don't have to do this, baby. If you're scared, if you want to go home, we can." Maya shook her head firmly. "The people who lost their money need someone to tell what happened. That's me. I found the proof, so I have to tell." She stood up, straightened her dress, a nice one Dorothy had bought her especially for today, dark blue with white flowers, and walked toward Rachel without looking back. The door closed behind them, and Rose felt Marcus's hand on her shoulder. "She's incredible," he said quietly. "She's 7, Rose replied, voice breaking. "She should be worrying about dolls and cartoons, not testifying in federal court." "She's 7, Marcus agreed. "But she's also the bravest person I know, and she gets that from you." Inside the grand jury room, Maya sat in a chair that had been adjusted to her height, her feet finally touching the floor. 23 people sat in tiered rows, looking at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to sympathy. Rachel stood beside her, one hand resting lightly on the back of Maya's chair. "State your name for the record, please," the court reporter said. "Maya Rose Chen. And how old are you, Maya?" 7. "I'll be 8 in March. Rachel began with easy questions: where Maya lived, what grade she was in, whether she understood the importance of telling the truth. Maya answered each one clearly, her voice small but steady in the large room. Then Rachel pulled up photographs on a screen. "Maya, do you recognize this building?" "Yes, that's the Whitmore estate, where the Christmas party was." "And do you recognize this structure?" The image showed the treehouse lit with Christmas lights, branches reaching toward the sky. Maya leaned forward, studying it. "That's the treehouse I climbed, the big one with the room inside." "Can you tell us why you climbed up there?" Maya thought about her answer carefully, the way she always did. "My grandma was working at the party. I was supposed to stay inside, but I heard people talking about the tree houses, and I wanted to see them. They looked pretty with all the lights." "What happened when you got to the tree house?" "I climbed the ladder. The platform was big. There was a door to a room inside." "Did you go into that room?" "Yes." "What did you find there?" Maya described the small enclosed space, the built-in benches, the faded wallpaper with silver stars. She described the toy chest and how she'd opened it, looking for old toys. When she got to the false bottom, several grand jury members leaned forward, fully engaged. "What made you think there was something under the bottom of the chest?" Rachel asked. "It sounded wrong when I knocked on it, hollow, and it wasn't very deep. There should have been more space." "What did you do?" "I found a place where I could get my fingernail under the wood. I lifted it up, and there was a metal ring attached to a door in the floor." "Were you scared?" Maya considered this. "A little bit, but also curious. I wanted to know what was down there." "So you opened it?" "Yes. There was a ladder going down into the dark. I climbed down." Rachel displayed more photographs, these taken by FBI forensics teams. The stone room, the shelves of boxes, the desk with the ledger. Maya identified each element, describing where things had been positioned, what she'd touched, what she'd looked at. "Did you take anything from the room that night?" Rachel asked. "No, but my grandma did, after she found me down there. She took some papers and one box. She said we needed to show someone." "Did you understand what the papers were?" "Not really, not then. There were lots of numbers and names, but Grandma said they were important. She said they showed where money went." "Do you understand now what those papers showed?" Maya nodded slowly. "They showed that people stole money that was supposed to help the town, money that was supposed to go to teachers and firefighters and regular people, but instead it went to rich people who already had money. That's called embezzlement and fraud." A few grand jury members exchanged glances. One older woman wiped at her eyes. Rachel asked a few more questions, establishing timeline and chain of custody. Then she opened it up for the grand jury to ask their own questions. A man in his 50s raised his hand. "Maya, did anyone tell you to look for that room, or tell you what to say about it?" "No, sir. I found it by accident because I was curious." "And your grandmother? She didn't know it was there?" "No, she was surprised, and a little bit mad that I'd left where I was supposed to be." A woman in the back row spoke next. "Are you scared, honey, of the people who did these bad things?" Maya thought about this carefully. "Sometimes, when someone broke Uncle Marcus's window, or when people say mean things. But Grandma says being scared is okay, as long as you don't let it stop you from doing what's right." "Your grandmother is a smart woman," the woman said softly. The questions continued for another 30 minutes, but they were gentle, respectful. These were ordinary citizens confronted with extraordinary theft, and they treated Maya with the care she deserved. Finally, Rachel asked if there were any more questions. When no hands raised, she thanked Maya and led her from the room. In the hallway, Rose was waiting, and Maya ran to her, pressing her face against her grandmother's coat. "You did so good, baby," Rose whispered. So good." Rachel smiled at them both. She was perfect, clear, honest, unshakable. The jury was moved. I could see it in their faces. Over the next 3 days, 27 other witnesses testified. Dorothy and Ben and Henry and Patricia, all describing the pension fund collapse and what it had cost them. Forensic accountants walked the jury through the money trail, connecting shell companies to real people. FBI agents testified about the authenticity of the documents, about how the underground room had been sealed and preserved. And Marcus testified, explaining how he'd verified the information, cross-referenced with public records, built a journalistic case that was now supporting a legal one. By Friday afternoon, the grand jury returned indictments against 11 people. David Fletcher, Thomas Caldwell, James Morrison, and 8 others, living and dead, named as co-conspirators in a decades-long scheme to defraud thousands of people of hundreds of millions of dollars. The indictments were unsealed immediately. Rose watched the news conference from Marcus's apartment, Maya beside her, as the U.S. attorney announced the charges. "This case represents one of the largest financial fraud prosecutions in this district's history," he said, his voice firm and clear. "These defendants betrayed the public trust, stole from hard-working people, and attempted to hide their crimes for more than 30 years. But they failed. Because one curious child asked questions, because one family refused to stay silent, and because this community demanded justice." He looked directly at the camera. "To anyone who thinks they can steal from ordinary people and hide behind positions of power, today's indictments send a clear message. The truth will find you. And when it does, you will be held accountable." Maya watched silently, then looked up at Rose. "Does this mean it's over?" "No, baby. There's still trials, still more testimony, but it means we were right. It means what we found mattered." "Good," Maya said simply. The trials began in March, 3 months after Maya had climbed that treehouse ladder. The prosecution had built an overwhelming case, but the defense fought hard, hiring expensive attorneys who attacked every piece of evidence, questioned every witness's memory, suggested alternative explanations for every transaction. Maya had to testify again, this time in open court. Rose sat in the gallery, hands clenched, watching her granddaughter sit in the witness box, looking impossibly small. But when Maya spoke, her voice carried. She described the hidden room with perfect clarity. She answered every question directly and honestly. And when the defense attorney tried to suggest she'd been coached, tried to imply she was too young to remember accurately, Maya looked him straight in the eye. "I know what I saw," she said firmly. "I found the door. I climbed down the ladder. I saw the boxes and the books. Nobody told me to say that. It's just what happened." The jury believed her. Rose could see it in their faces. The first verdict came in April. Thomas Caldwell, guilty on all counts. 16 years in federal prison. The courtroom erupted in applause, quickly silenced by the judge, but the emotion couldn't be contained. Dorothy sobbed. Henry raised his fist in triumph. Patricia just sat with her hands over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. David Fletcher's trial ended in May, guilty on 12 of 14 counts, 22 years. James Morrison took a plea deal rather than face trial, admitting guilt in exchange for a reduced sentence of 8 years. By summer, all 11 defendants had been convicted or pled guilty. The combined sentences totaled more than 130 years. Asset seizures began immediately, properties and bank accounts frozen, everything liquidated to create a restitution fund. In June, Rose received a letter from the Victim Compensation Division. Based on her lost pension and years of hardship, she was entitled to receive $78,000 from the restitution fund. It wasn't everything she'd lost, but it was enough. Enough to pay off debt. Enough to put money away for Maya's education. Enough to stop cleaning other people's houses and maybe, just maybe, rest for the first time in years. Dorothy received $62,000. Ben got $59,000. Henry, $83,000. Every verified victim received something, recompense for theft that had shaped their lives for decades. But the money, while important, wasn't the real victory. The real victory was the truth finally told, recorded in court transcripts and jury verdicts. The real victory was powerful men sitting in prison cells, their reputations destroyed, their theft acknowledged. The real victory was justice. In August, the town of Riverside Junction held a ceremony at the Whitmore estate. The Historical Society, under new management after the previous board resigned in disgrace, had voted to convert the underground room beneath the treehouse into a permanent exhibit about whistleblowing, transparency, and civic courage. Rose and Maya were invited as guests of honor. They arrived to find hundreds of people gathered, including many they recognized from the trials, the meetings, the long journey from discovery to justice. The new mayor, a woman named Susan Ortiz, who'd run on a reform platform and won in a landslide, spoke first. This town was built on a lie, a beautiful lie about civic duty and community development, but a lie nonetheless. For too long, we allowed that lie to define us. But two people, a grandmother and her granddaughter, refused to let the lie continue. They chose truth over comfort, justice over silence, and because of them, we can finally begin to heal. She gestured to the treehouse, now fully restored and safe for visitors. This structure will stand as a reminder, not of our shame, but of our redemption, of what's possible when ordinary people do extraordinary things. Dorothy spoke next, her voice shaking but strong. I lost almost everything 30 years ago. My pension, my home, my sense of security. For decades I thought it was my fault that I'd somehow failed. But Maya and Rose gave me back something more valuable than money. They gave me back my dignity. They proved it wasn't my failure. It was theft. And now, finally, I can rest knowing the truth is known. When it was Rose's turn to speak, she stood at the podium with Maya beside her and looked out at the assembled crowd. She saw faces of people she'd cleaned houses for, people who'd looked through her like she was invisible. She saw faces of people she'd stood beside in unemployment lines and food banks. She saw the whole spectrum of her community, brought together by revelation and reckoning. I'm not a hero, she said quietly. I'm just a grandmother who recognized important documents when she saw them. Maya is the one who found them. Maya is the one who was brave enough to climb into the unknown and curious enough to ask why things were hidden. She looked down at her granddaughter. But what Maya taught me, what all of this taught me, is that ordinary people have power. We have the power to ask questions, to demand accountability, to refuse to look away from uncomfortable truths. That power doesn't come from money or position, it comes from courage. And courage is something we all have access to, if we're willing to use it. The crowd stood and applauded, the sound rolling across the estate grounds like thunder. Maya pressed close to Rose's side, overwhelmed but smiling. After the ceremony, they walked through the restored treehouse with a small group. The toy chest was still there, now behind glass, with a plaque explaining its significance. The false bottom was displayed separately, the hidden door preserved as historical artifact. But the underground room itself had been converted into a museum space. The boxes of documents were gone, secured in federal archives, but photographs and selected reproductions lined the walls. Visitors could read excerpts from the ledger, see the careful handwriting of Robert Whitmore as he documented his father's crimes, understand the scope of the betrayal. At the center of the room stood a display about Maya, her school photo, enlarged to poster size, copies of the news articles, a timeline of events from discovery to conviction, and at the bottom, a simple plaque. Maya Rose Chen, age 7, proved that courage has no age requirement, and that truth, once uncovered, cannot be reburied. Maya stood in front of it, reading the words slowly. Will people remember? She asked quietly. Years from now, will they remember what happened? Yes, Rose said firmly. That's why we built this, so no one forgets, so future generations understand that justice is possible, even against powerful opposition. They stayed until sunset, walking the grounds, talking with visitors, telling their story over and over to people who wanted to understand how a child's curiosity had exposed such massive corruption. As they prepared to leave, Marcus joined them at the estate gates. He'd won 3 journalism awards for his coverage, been offered positions at major newspapers, but had chosen to stay at the Tribune. Some stories, he said, were more important than career advancement. There's something else, he said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. The Historical Society Board wanted me to give you this. Rose opened it carefully. Inside was a letter and a check. The letter explained that the society was establishing the Maya Chen Memorial Scholarship Fund, providing college funding for children who demonstrated exceptional courage and integrity. The initial endowment was $100,000, funded by donations from across the country. Rose's hands shook as she read. They want to name a scholarship after her? Not just any scholarship, Marcus said. One that recognizes kids who stand up for what's right even when it's hard. Kids who ask difficult questions and refuse to accept easy lies. Kids like Maya. Maya looked up at both of them. Does that mean other kids will be brave because of what I did? Yes, Rose said, tears flowing freely now. That's exactly what it means. They drove home as the last light faded from the sky. 3 people bound by blood and experience, and a shared understanding of what they'd accomplished together. The threats had stopped. The trials were over, the convictions secured, and now, finally, they could return to something resembling normal life, except nothing would ever be truly normal again. Because they'd learned what it meant to stand in the gap between wrong and right, to choose discomfort over complicity, to believe that ordinary people could change the world if they were willing to try. Rose's house, which she'd been able to buy outright with her restitution payment, sat on a quiet street in a neighborhood that was neither rich nor poor, just solidly middle class. They pulled into the driveway, and Maya ran ahead to unlock the door, her key, their key, turning smoothly in the lock. Inside, everything was clean and warm and safe. Rose had furnished it slowly over the summer, second-hand pieces and donated items, creating a home that felt earned rather than given. On the mantel sat 3 framed items, Maya's school photo, Dorothy's thank you card, and a newspaper clipping of the day the first guilty verdict was announced. That night, after Maya was in bed, Rose sat on her porch with a cup of tea and looked up at the stars. She thought about the journey that had begun with a Christmas party and a curious child. She thought about the fear and the threats and the moments she'd wanted to give up. She thought about the people who'd supported them and the people who'd tried to break them. But mostly she thought about Maya, sleeping safely in her own room, in their own house, bought with money that had been stolen and finally returned. She thought about the scholarship fund that would help other children be brave. She thought about the museum that would teach future generations about accountability and courage. And she realized that sometimes the most important stories aren't about people who set out to be heroes. They're about people who simply refuse to look away. People who see something wrong and say something even when it costs them. People who believe that truth matters more than comfort, that justice matters more than convenience. Anyone can change the world if they're brave enough to ask questions and strong enough to demand answers. The truth doesn't stay buried forever. Sometimes, all it needs is one curious child and one determined grandmother to bring it into the light. As the autumn wind stirred the leaves in Rose Chen's small yard, she set down her teacup and walked back inside her home. Their home, earned through courage, secured through justice. She checked on Maya one last time, watching her granddaughter sleep with the peaceful expression of someone who knows they've done something that matters. Tomorrow, Maya would start 3rd grade at a school where she was no longer the poor kid whose grandmother cleaned houses, but the girl who'd helped expose massive corruption. Rose had been offered a job at the new community center that had been built with properly administered funds, teaching financial literacy to help people recognize fraud. Their lives had been transformed not by luck or chance, but by the simple decision to care more about what was right than what was easy. Because for Rose and Maya and everyone they'd helped, justice wasn't just a word in a courtroom, it was a promise kept, a wrong made right, and proof that even the smallest voices can echo loud enough to shake the foundations of power. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories of hope, heart, and unexpected heroes. Click to continue the journey with us, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe truth matters, no matter who discovers it.